I was standing at my front window at 7:15 on a December evening watching purple and green smoke pour out of my neighbor's chimney. Not a little smoke. A considerable amount of smoke. The specific dramatic output of 4 colored novelty logs burning simultaneously in a fireplace that had been loaded by someone who had taken those logs from my firewood stack that same morning. I had put those particular logs there on purpose. I had known for 4 days exactly who had been taking my firewood. And now, as the purple and green column rose above the roofline of Norma Bridges' house and drifted down the street in the cold Asheville December air, so did everyone else in Ridgemont Hills. My name is Patrick Calloway. I am 57 years old. I spent 29 years as a mechanical engineer in industrial systems design, which means I spent 29 years diagnosing problems in systems where the numbers were supposed to add up and didn't, finding the source of the discrepancy, and fixing it with the specific satisfaction of a person who has identified the precise thing that is wrong and corrected it precisely. I retired in 2020, and in March of 2021, my wife Sandra and I purchased a home in Ridgemont Hills, a residential community in Asheville, North Carolina, in the Blue Ridge Mountains, because we had both spent our careers in cities, and we had decided that the final chapter of our lives would be lived somewhere with mountains and cold winters and wood fires, and the specific unhurried quality of a place that does not require you to be anywhere in particular at any particular time. Sandra was 55, a retired pharmacist with 30 years of medication reconciliation behind her, which is a field that requires the same methodical precision as mechanical engineering and produces the same professional habit of noticing when quantities do not match what they should be. This habit became relevant in November of 2021 in a way neither of us had anticipated. The firewood was my fall ritual. Every September I ordered a cord of seasoned hardwood, split and delivered, and spent a weekend stacking it along the side of the house in the specific way I had learned produced the most stable and accessible stack. Bark side up for weather resistance, tight rows with a slight backward lean, good air circulation between the rows to keep it dry. It was not a complicated operation, but I had done it carefully for 3 years at our previous house, and I had come to regard it the way I regarded any well-executed system, with the quiet satisfaction of something built correctly and running as intended. The stack sat along the right side of the house, visible from the street through a low-slung gate that latched but did not lock. About 4 feet high, 8 feet long, a full cord of mixed oak and hickory ready for an Asheville winter. Frank Ose lived directly next door on the left side of the property. He was 59, a retired civil engineer who had spent 32 years on infrastructure projects across the Southeast and who had the particular methodical patience of someone who has spent a career building things that need to last. He and I had gotten along from the first week, the easy companionship of 2 engineers who had both retired into the mountains and were content to talk shop over the fence or not talk at all, depending on the day. He was observant in the quiet way of someone who pays attention to things without making a production of it, and he would become, in December of 2021, the most useful neighbor I could have had. Norma Bridge had been HOA president of Ridgemont Hills for 4 years when we moved in. She was 63, a former regional manager for a retail chain based in Charlotte who had overseen 12 stores across western North Carolina and had developed in that career a thorough comfort with operational oversight, compliance auditing, and the specific authority that comes from being the person who sets the standards and measures everyone else against them. She had brought this skill set to the Ridgemont Hills HOA with complete commitment and had run it with the efficiency of someone who had never encountered a system she didn't believe could benefit from more structure. She introduced herself to me in April of 2021, about 3 weeks after we moved in, by knocking on my door and telling me that my firewood stack presented a storage aesthetics concern under Section 11 of the Community Guidelines. I thanked her and went inside and read Section 11. Section 11 governed exterior storage, and it covered items such as trash receptacles, recycling bins, portable storage units, and recreational equipment. It did not mention firewood anywhere in the section or anywhere else in the document. I called Norma the following day and told her, pleasantly and with the specific section reference, that I had reviewed the guidelines and found no applicable prohibition on residential firewood storage, and that the stack would remain. She said the board had the authority to interpret the guidelines broadly in matters of community aesthetics. I said I looked forward to seeing that interpretation in writing. The violation notice arrived 3 days later. I filed a formal dispute through the HOA's dispute process, citing the absence of any written prohibition. The violation was voided 2 weeks later. The second violation notice arrived in August of 2021. The firewood stack allegedly exceeded a reasonable height for exterior storage based on community aesthetic standards. I measured the stack. It was 4 feet high. I looked through the entire community guidelines document for a height specification on exterior storage. There was none. I filed another dispute with my measurements documented and a written request for the specific guideline provision the notice was based on. The violation was voided again, this time with a notation from the dispute committee that the board should cite specific provisions rather than general aesthetic authority in future notices. I noted that both violations had involved my firewood stack specifically. I noted this and continued stacking wood and waiting for winter. In October of 2021, Sandra mentioned over dinner that we seemed to be going through firewood faster than she expected. We had lit maybe a dozen fires since the weather had turned, which at 4 to 6 logs per fire meant we had used somewhere between 50 and 70 logs. The stack seemed to be down considerably more than that. I told her I would take a look. I am a mechanical engineer. When a system shows unexpected consumption, I measure it. I counted the stack the following Saturday morning. I had been meticulous about the original delivery count because I always was, and I had a figure I trusted. What I counted that morning was significantly lower than the figure I expected after accounting for our usage. I counted again, same result. Sandra came out with coffee and watched me count the second time, and when I told her the number she looked at the stack, and then at me and said, with the pharmacist's flat precision of someone identifying a dosing discrepancy, "That's 40 logs more than we've burned." I ordered a motion-activated camera that afternoon and had it mounted on the side of the house covering the firewood stack by Wednesday. It was positioned discreetly, aimed at the stack and the gate, with a clear field of view that covered anyone approaching from the street or the side yard. I set the motion sensitivity, confirmed the night vision was working, linked it to my phone, and went back inside and told Sandra I had installed a camera. She asked why I hadn't told Norma or filed a report. I told her I wanted to know who it was before I did anything. She said that was sensible. I did not have to wait long. On December 3, 2021, my phone buzzed at 6:47 in the morning with a motion alert. I opened the camera app. The footage was clear and well lit by the camera's night vision in the grey pre-dawn, and it showed Norma Bridge standing at my firewood stack in her winter coat and gloves, a canvas tote bag over one arm. She was selecting logs with the unhurried attention of someone who has done this before and is not in any particular hurry, turning each log briefly to check its size before placing it in the bag. She took 6 logs. She latched the gate behind her when she left. The whole sequence took 4 minutes and 20 seconds. I watched it 3 times. Then I put my phone on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling for a while. Sandra was awake. She had felt me reach for the phone. She asked what the alert was. I told her it was Norma. Sandra was quiet for a moment, and then she said, with the flat precision I had come to associate with her assessment of situations that required careful handling, "What are you going to do?" I told her I was going to the outdoor supply store. She said she would make breakfast. I had researched colored smoke novelty logs the previous week after the idea had come to me with the specific clarity that engineering solutions sometimes arrive, fully formed, when you have been thinking about a problem without realizing you are thinking about it. They were a real and commercially available product, sold in outdoor recreation stores and novelty shops, designed as a fireplace entertainment item. When burned in a standard fireplace, they produced dense, dramatically colored smoke, most commonly in purple, green, or blue, that came out of the chimney in a visible and unmistakable column. They were completely non-toxic, entirely legal, and generated zero safety concern for the fireplace or the home. They were novelty items. They were also, for my specific situation, exactly what I needed. I drove to an outdoor supply and novelty store on Merriman Avenue in Asheville on December 5th and purchased 12 colored smoke logs in a mixed pack of purple and green. The man at the register asked if I was doing a holiday display. I told him something like that. He said they were popular around Christmas. I said I could imagine. On the evening of December 6th, after dark, I arranged the smoke logs at the top and front of my firewood stack, in the positions most visible and accessible from the gate. The regular logs I pushed to the back. The smoke logs looked like ordinary logs. They were slightly lighter in color, but in the December morning light, particularly at 6:40 in the morning before full sunrise, the difference was not the kind of thing a person collecting their neighbor's firewood quickly would pause to examine. I latched the gate and went inside and told Sandra the stage was set. She asked what was going to happen. I told her to watch the chimney around dinner time the following evening. She looked at me for a moment and then said, with the quiet approval she reserved for solutions she found elegant, that I had missed my calling as a pharmacist. December 7th, 2021. My phone buzzed at 6:42 in the morning. Motion alert. I opened the app. Norma was at the stack in her coat and gloves with the canvas tote. She selected 4 logs from the front of the stack with her usual unhurried attention, placed them in the bag, latched the gate, and walked back toward her house. All 4 logs were smoke logs. The camera captured every second of it in clear early morning light with a full timestamp in the corner of the frame. I set the phone on the nightstand. Sandra said, "Did she take them?" I said she had taken 4. Sandra said, "All smoke logs." I said, "All smoke logs." Sandra was quiet for a moment and then made a sound I can only describe as deeply satisfied. I told her dinner was going to be interesting. She said she was looking forward to it. We spent the day as we usually did. Sandra worked on a book she had been reading. I did some work on a woodworking project in the garage. We had lunch. The afternoon moved at the comfortable pace of a retired couple's December Saturday in the mountains. I built a fire in our fireplace around 4 o'clock using our own regular logs, which were in a separate indoor rack and had not been disturbed, and we sat by it and read and drank tea and waited for evening. At 7:15 p.m., I got up to refill my tea and glanced out the front window as I passed it. Norma's chimney was producing purple and green smoke in a volume that I want to describe accurately. It was not a wisp. It was not an ambiguous discoloration. It was a dense, fully saturated column of purple and green that rose from the chimney cap into the cold Asheville December sky with the dramatic visibility of something designed specifically to be seen, which is exactly what it had been designed for. The smoke caught the streetlight on the way up, and the effect was, I will admit, more spectacular than I had anticipated, even having anticipated it fairly specifically. I stood at the window and watched it for a moment. Then I called Sandra over. She stood beside me and looked at Norma's chimney and did not say anything for approximately 10 seconds. Then she said, "That's really quite something." I told her I agreed. At 7:18 p.m., Norma's front door opened and Glenn Bridge came out onto the porch in his house slippers and looked up at the chimney with the expression of a man who has been presented with information he does not yet know what to do with. He looked at the smoke. He looked at the street. He looked at the smoke again. Then he went back inside. At 7:22 p.m. my phone rang. Frank Osei, I picked up. "Patrick," Frank said, with the careful precision of someone confirming information before drawing a conclusion. "Are you seeing what's coming out of Norma's chimney right now?" "I am, Frank," I said. A pause. "Is that purple?" "Purple and green," I said. A longer pause. "Patrick, did you do that?" "She took logs from my stack this morning," I said. "I've been watching her take them for weeks. The ones she took today were a commercially available colored smoke novelty product I purchased on Merriman Avenue." There was a silence on Frank's end that had a quality I can only describe as the sound of a retired engineer processing an elegant solution. Then he said, "Patrick, I need to tell you something. I've been watching her come through your side gate 3 times in the past 3 weeks. I thought it was some kind of arrangement you two had. I nearly said something to you last Tuesday and then thought it wasn't my business." A pause. "I wish I had said something." "It's all right," I said. "Are you watching the chimney?" "I'm on my porch," he said. 3 neighbors are also on their porches. Mrs. Whittaker just came outside with her phone. Several houses down the street, I could see porch lights coming on as people came out to look at the purple and green display rising from the chimney of the HOA president's house. The smoke was visible for at least 3 blocks. I went back to my chair and picked up my tea and waited for the knock I knew was coming. It came at 7:45 p.m. Norma Bridge was on my front step with the composed fury of someone who has been publicly embarrassed and has organized the embarrassment into a formal complaint during the walkover. She was still in her evening clothes, a heavy cardigan over her indoor shirt, and she had the specific expression of a woman who has come to have a confrontation she has prepared for and expects to control. "What was in those logs?" she said. I kept my voice pleasant and unhurried. "Commercially available colored smoke novelty logs," I said. "Legal, non-toxic, sold openly for fireplace entertainment use. I have the receipt if you'd like to see it. They produce colored smoke when burned, as you've discovered." "You put those there deliberately," she said. "I put them in my own firewood stack," I said, "on my own property." "You knew that she stopped herself. I looked at her. "You knew that you what, Norma?" I said. I kept my voice very gentle. She recovered with the speed of someone who has spent 20 years in retail management and knows how to pivot from a position that isn't working. She said she had been borrowing logs from my stack as a neighborly gesture, and that the arrangement had always been informal, and that I had no right to put novelty products in my stack without warning her. "You were borrowing them," I said. "It was a neighborly arrangement," she said. "When did we arrange it?" I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said I was being deliberately obstructive and that I should have communicated any concerns through the proper HOA channels rather than resorting to what she called entrapment. I said I didn't entrap anyone. I put legal products on my own property. Nothing that happened tonight was caused by anything other than a decision you made this morning. I paused. "Would you like to see why I bought those particular logs?" I opened my laptop on the table by the door and showed her the December 3rd footage. 6 minutes and 47 seconds of Norma Bridge in her winter coat and gloves at my firewood stack, selecting logs, loading them into her canvas tote, latching my gate behind her. Clear, time-stamped, unambiguous. I let the full clip play without saying anything. When it finished, I said, "That's from 4 days ago. I have footage going back before that showing the stack after various points, and a count showing approximately 40 logs missing beyond our personal usage over the past 6 weeks. I looked at her. "I have this morning's footage as well. All 4 logs she took were smoke logs." Norma was looking at the laptop screen with an expression I had not seen on her before. The composed administrative bearing had not entirely left, but something had shifted beneath it. The specific shift that occurs when a person's confident assessment of a situation encounters information that fundamentally changes what the situation is. "I'll be speaking to my attorney," she said. Her voice was controlled, but it was working harder than it usually did. "Please do," I said. "Mine is Helen Cross. She's been briefed, and she's expecting contact." I held Norma's gaze for a moment, not unkindly, but with the steadiness of someone who has been patient for 6 weeks and is no longer required to be patient about this specific matter. Then I said good night, and I closed the door. I called Helen Cross the following morning. Helen was 51, an HOA and property law specialist in Asheville with 24 years of practice and the direct clarity of someone who has spent 2 decades watching property disputes develop and has become very good at identifying which ones have substance and which ones are theater. I told her everything in order: the missing firewood, the count, the camera installation, the December 3rd footage, the smoke logs, the December 7th footage, Norma's visit, and the conversation at the door. Helen listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, with the precision of someone organizing claims, theft of personal property over a documented 6-week period, repeated trespass through your side gate without permission, the harassment angle through the targeted violation notices about the firewood stack specifically. A pause, and she showed up at your door and called it borrowing. "She did," I said. "Patrick," Helen said, "did you happen to keep the receipt for the novelty logs?" I told her I had. "Keep it," she said. I want to use it. Frank Osei came to my door on December 10th with a written statement he had prepared, 3 pages in his precise engineer's handwriting. He had documented the 3 occasions in November on which he had observed Norma entering my side gate, with dates and approximate times, and a physical description of what he had observed on each occasion. He had documented the December 7th chimney event with his own timeline, including the time he had first noticed the colored smoke, the time he had called me, and the names of 4 other neighbors he had spoken with who had also observed the smoke from their properties that evening. He handed me the statement and said, with the dry understatement of a man who had spent 32 years in civil engineering, I should have said something in November. I'm saying it now. Helen's formal demand letter went to Norma and to the HOA board on December 15th. It was 5 pages, fully documented, and it covered 3 things with equal precision. The theft of personal property, documented by camera footage, and a count showing approximately 40 logs removed over 6 weeks at a documented replacement value based on current Asheville cord wood pricing, which Helen had researched herself. The repeated trespass, documented by Frank's statement and the camera footage, and the pattern of targeted HOA violation notices directed specifically at the Firewood stack over the preceding 8 months, which Helen characterized as a targeted harassment campaign using HOA authority to pressure a homeowner over property she was simultaneously stealing. The letter demanded written acknowledgement of the theft, full restitution for the missing firewood at replacement value, and an immediate cessation of trespass. It was sent certified mail and email simultaneously, and the board received it 2 days before Christmas. In January of 2022, I received a call from Deborah Yoon. Deborah was 53, the HOA board secretary who had been in the role for 2 years and who had, by her own account, been growing increasingly uncomfortable with the direction Norma's leadership had taken over that period. She asked if we could speak privately. We met at a coffee shop on Lexington Avenue in Asheville on a Wednesday morning. She arrived with a folder and the expression of someone who has made a decision they consider both necessary and overdue. She told me she had been on the board long enough to know that something had been wrong with Norma's approach for at least a year, and had not previously felt she had a formal mechanism to address it. Helen's December letter had given her one. She slid the folder across the table. Inside were printed copies of internal HOA board email communications. One email in particular, sent by Norma to Phil Tanner, the board's vice president, in late October of 2021, stopped me completely. It read, in its entirety, Callaway has an excess of firewood he clearly isn't using. I've been helping myself as needed, and it's been perfectly fine. His stack is accessible from the street side. She had written it as a passing observation, the specific tone of someone mentioning a convenience they have discovered and feel entirely entitled to, like finding a coffee machine in an office kitchen and knotting it for a colleague. There was no awareness in the sentence, not even a trace of one, that she was describing taking someone else's property without permission. There were 2 other things in the folder that Deborah had included because she thought I should know. In the previous spring, a homeowner named Linda Marsh, who lived 3 streets over, had reported to Deborah informally that 2 ceramic garden pots from her front porch had gone missing. Linda had not filed a formal complaint because she had no evidence and had eventually concluded she was mistaken about having put them there. In the summer, a retired teacher named Bill Hensley had mentioned to Deborah that a set of garden tools he kept in an unlocked shed had disappeared. Again, no formal complaint, no evidence, a shrug, and a conclusion that perhaps he had misplaced them. Deborah had not connected either incident to Norma until she had read Helen's demand letter and the December 3rd footage description, and then she had connected them immediately, the way things connect when you have been given the piece that makes the pattern visible. I called Helen from the parking lot. Helen was quiet through the email description in the specific way that meant she was expanding the scope of what she was building. When I finished, she said, "The email establishes that she considered your firewood available for her use and had been taking it for weeks with no awareness that she was doing anything wrong. That is not an impulsive act or a desperate one. That is an entitlement so complete that she discussed it casually in a board communication." A pause. The garden pots and the tools are part of a pattern. I'm going to contact Linda Marsh and Bill Hensley. Patrick, I want to file in February. Helen filed the civil suit in February of 2022. The claims were theft of personal property, covering the documented 6 weeks of firewood theft, with full replacement value, repeated trespass, and harassment through the targeted violation notice campaign. The filing also referenced the broader pattern across multiple homeowners as evidence of conduct extending beyond a single incident. Norma retained a defense attorney named Brian Sato, a civil defense practitioner in Asheville who had a solid professional reputation, and who, Helen told me after reviewing his initial filings, had clearly read the October email and understood the difficulty of the position he had been retained to defend. The deposition of Norma Bridge took place on May 12, 2022, in a conference room at Helen's Asheville office. I was present. Norma came with Brian Sato and the composed professional bearing she brought everywhere. Helen spent the first 30 minutes on foundation, Norma's role as HOA president, the board's authority, the timeline of the violation notices, Norma's access to the neighborhood and its properties. Norma answered every question with the smooth efficiency of a prepared witness who had spent 2 decades in institutional management and knew how to present in a formal setting. Then Helen opened the folder with the email. She read the relevant sentence to Norma without preamble. Callaway has an excess of firewood he clearly isn't using. I've been helping myself as needed, and it's been perfectly fine. Helen set the printed email on the table, looked at Norma, and said, Ms. Bridge, when you wrote that you had been helping yourself to Mr. Callaway's firewood as needed, were you describing asking for his permission or taking it without his permission? Norma said it had been a neighborly arrangement. Helen said, did Mr. Callaway agree to this arrangement at any point? Norma said the accessibility of the stack had implied a shared use understanding. Helen said, with the specific patience of someone who has prepared this question carefully and wants the answer on the record clearly, Ms. Bridge, does the physical accessibility of someone's property imply permission to take from it? Norma looked at Brian Sato. Brian looked at his legal pad. Norma looked back at Helen and said that in an established neighborhood community, a certain degree of informal sharing was generally understood. Helen said, in December of last year, when you came to Mr. Callaway's door after the colored smoke logs burned in your fireplace, you described your firewood collection as borrowing logs as a neighborly gesture. Did you use the word borrowing because you intended to return them? Norma said it was a figure of speech. Helen said, so you were taking them, not borrowing them. The silence that followed lasted 10 seconds. Brian Sato did not request a break this time. He simply wrote something on his legal pad and did not look up for a while. Helen's final question was delivered in the same even tone she had used throughout. Ms. Bridge, the violation notices you issued to Mr. Callaway in April and August of 2021 both concerned his firewood stack. During that same period, you were taking firewood from that stack without his permission. Did you consider at any point that issuing violation notices about the storage of property you were simultaneously removing without authorization presented a conflict? Norma was very still for a moment. Then she said the violation notices had been issued in her official capacity as HOA president on the basis of community standards and were entirely separate from any personal matter. Brian Sato did not add anything to this answer. The deposition concluded 25 minutes later. The settlement conference was July 6, 2022. Brian Sato came without Norma. He was professional and moved through the terms with the efficiency of someone who has assessed the documentary record independently and reached conclusions he is not going to argue against. The settlement was signed on July 20, 2022. The terms were complete and binding. Total damages were $22,000. Norma paid $14,000 personally, covering the theft, the trespass, and the harassment campaign through targeted violation notices. The HOA's insurance carrier covered $8,000 after their own review of the email, and the footage produced a settlement recommendation that their adjuster delivered without apparent hesitation. The full replacement value of the stolen firewood, calculated at current Asheville cord wood pricing for seasoned mixed hardwood, was paid personally by Norma as part of the $14,000. All HOA violation notices issued to my property during Norma's presidency were voided from the HOA record. A written apology from the HOA board was posted on the community forum and the physical notice board in the clubhouse for 30 days. Norma agreed to resign as HOA president within 30 days. She agreed to no further contact with me, Sandra, or our property. She resigned in August of 2022. Deborah Yoon was appointed interim president. Her first communication to the community was a single email, 3 paragraphs, covering the fall yard maintenance schedule, a reminder about holiday decoration guidelines, and a note about the upcoming board meeting date. It was politely worded, clearly organized, and entirely free of aesthetic compliance warnings about firewood stacks. In December of 2022, on the first cold weekend of the Asheville winter, Frank Osei came over on a Saturday morning and helped me stack the new cord of firewood that had been delivered the previous week. He had volunteered in October, unprompted, saying only that 2 engineers could stack a cord faster than 1 and that he had the morning free. We worked through the morning in the cold Blue Ridge air, splitting the few pieces that needed it, stacking everything tight, and even with bark side up, good air circulation between the rows. Sandra brought coffee out at 10 o'clock, and we stood by the stack with our mugs and looked at the mountains going gray in the December light. Frank looked at the finished stack for a moment. Then he looked at me with the dry expression of a retired engineer who has fully processed a situation and filed it under resolved. "You putting any special logs in there this year?" he said. "Don't need to," I said. "New president." "Deborah sent me a nice email about the holiday decoration guidelines," he said. "One email," I said, politely worded. "Frank considered this revolutionary," he said. We drank our coffee. The stack was solid and even and correctly proportioned, the way things are when they are built by people who know how to build them. The gate was latched. The camera was still mounted on the side of the house, because I had no particular reason to take it down and some general reasons to leave it up, but it had nothing to record. The firewood was mine, stacked correctly on my property, going nowhere unless I put it in my fireplace. The mountains were gray and the air was cold, and the Asheville winter was coming in the way it always came, slowly and with the specific weight of altitude, and everything was exactly as it should be. Now I want to ask you something, because I have thought about this since December of 2021, and I find it genuinely interesting. Has anyone ever had a neighbor help themselves to something of yours as if they had every right to it? Not a misunderstanding, not an accident, but the specific entitlement of a person who looked at something you owned and decided it was available because they wanted it to be. Tell me what happened in the comments. I read every one, and I want to hear your story. And if this story made you want to go check your firewood stack, subscribe. The next story is coming soon, and I promise it starts even better than purple smoke from a neighbor's chimney. That is a high bar, and I intend to clear it.